Recording's on. Hey, business builders. This is a business builder expert interview that's also going to end up being combined in a sense with a business builder profile because of the two gentlemen that I have on video here today. But first, we're joined by Bob McCormack, and I'll read just a little bit of the formal intro here, Bob. I won't read the whole thing. So Bob McCormack is managing partner and founding partner of Murphy McCormack Capital Advisors, which is a boutique investment banking and corporate advisory firm in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Bob has more than 32 years of financial services experience and focuses on providing advisory services related to business sales, mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, business valuations, debt and equity financing, and select turnaround projects. And I'll say briefly the way that I met Bob, and actually Chad doesn't know this yet, but Bob and Chad and I all have common friends in a company called Compass Point Consultants in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania. And I had a client who wanted to buy a business. So they're in a position where they're in a pretty good cash position. Their business is well established, and they felt like it was a season in the market where it might make sense to go find a targeted acquisition, somebody within their vertical that they could buy. And so I said to my consultant friends, hey, who's the person that knows the most in our area about buying and selling businesses? And Bob, you're the one that came up at the top of the list. And after interviewing 3 M&A advisors, I knew that you were what Dave Ramsey would call somebody with a servant's heart, somebody who works to educate first and share information first. And as a result of like freely giving information like that, you've got a full dance card and plenty of business, and your firm is growing. So you're perfect to have on a call like this to answer some questions about having a plan to sell a business, how you go about selling a business. So thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that intro, Wayne. And you, it's funny you picked up on that servant piece. It was an underlying principle when we formed the company, a servant leadership approach. And we wanted to bring a customer relationship management style to a transactional industry. So appreciate that intro, Wayne.
Well, you don't hide it very well. So it just comes out. And selling businesses and having a plan is something near and dear to my heart, both because of working with clients who are building their businesses, but also because I worked in a family business, and my dad took on a private equity investor, and then later on we grew the company. We sold it to a publicly traded firm, and it was a good experience for me. And partially it was a really good experience for the company. It was fun. Was because we had a great advisor at that time that coached us on how to go through the sales process, and even coached us on how to do boardroom presentations and things like that. So yeah, so this is important. And Chad, so we've got Chad Butters with us today. Chad joined in because he wanted to be able to ask some specific questions. Chad's the founder of 8 Oaks Distillery. He has much more of a story than that, but that's kind of a big deal. They do, you don't call it field to fork, right? You call it from grain to glass, I guess, but works to raise the actual grain that gets harvested and then distilled into whiskey, and was a whole bunch of hand sanitizer too, and was like all over the news, right?
Yep, that's true.
Yeah, so really good to have you with us too.
That's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Super. So Bob, I to kind of lay out a format, I just said, hey, could you do 3 to 5 minutes of how you got here and what is your firm about, and then after that we'll see how it rolls. But if it would be great to have a bit of a case history or an example of how somebody contacted you and then you were able to take them through, hey, here's what it's like to sell, here's what you do, all the way up to the day that the deal ended.
Yeah, I'd be glad to, Wayne. Yeah, how I got here, just kind of quickly, my roots are banking. I graduated from Alvernia University in Reading with a degree in accounting, wanted to be a CPA. Got recruited by Core States instead, and who also paid for my CPA, and was a great training program, and spent years with Core States. We got acquired by First Union. I opted to stick with First Union. The region up here where I'm at, where I was regional president at the time, got sold to Sovereign Santander. And correspondent banking was one of my niches. So I was calling on local community banks, and one of them recruited me to be CEO. It was a turnaround, great fun in the end. We really turned the bank around. We dealt with our credit issues and core funding issues and some of those type things. Brought a great team of people in. I got lucky in the sense that Keystone got acquired by M&T, and they had 45 great employees I brought over. Core States merger, I brought a bunch of Core States people over. And, but we beat the financial crisis of 2008. My predecessor did some things with borrowing from the Federal Loan Bank, and interest rates dropped after 9/11. We couldn't solve those prepayment penalty type issues and interest rate risk issues, so we sold the bank. I did 9 acquisitions when I was at Sun. Loved doing M&A. Loved helping our clients in acquisitions, doing the financing, and saw a niche in the marketplace. There really wasn't anybody looking that was not really transactional focused and client centered. And we started the firm at that point. We're about a firm of about 12 people now. We cover much of pretty much all PA. We just opened an office in Pittsburgh. Talk about timing right before COVID. But it's been that office has actually been a good office for us as well. Our firm philosophy is really client centered. And by that, I mean, we really want to focus on the planning aspect versus XYZ person picks up the phone and calls, I want to sell my business, and we jump on it and sell it right away. There's often a better planning aspect of that and a much more deliberate process that we really like to see the client take. So, you know, we do a lot of valuation work where we don't charge. In fact, we probably do 10 to 20 valuations a month, and probably 70% of those are not charged type valuations. And they're really done for planning purposes. We really like the client to take the time to examine their valuation, understand the tax impact, understand what their net proceeds are, typical deal structures, what the buyer universe looks like. And really, we like to hone in on company-specific risk. Those often will delve into things that the business owner can do to improve the value of the business and the net proceeds post-closing and the quality of life post-closing. And that's how I got to know Tom Garrity, as Wayne alluded to, was working with Tom on helping some business owners plan. So Wayne, you asked for an example. I'll share an example that just happened this year, closed this year, but we started the process about 4 years ago. A wealth management firm over in the Lehigh Valley, we started an exit planning group, which consisted of Tom Garrity, a quality CPA firm that knew how to do M&A, a quality attorney, and a quality wealth management firm. And so we sit down monthly and talk about how do we plan, how we do things better for the client. Well, one of these customers came in through the wealth management firm. And when we initially valued the company, we valued it about $10 million. Nice company, nice little niche, second generation. But there were a number of company-specific risks we identified at that time. And what I mean by that were things like the value proposition was good, but it wasn't great. There weren't really barriers to entry to what they do. So they had their product was becoming more of a commodity than it really was. There was no depth of management. Back to a question that was asked, if he got beamed up tomorrow, the company was in trouble. And then from a tax perspective, they were probably misaligned tax-wise too from getting the best value post-close. So we specifically drilled down the company-specific risk. We worked with a wealth management firm to help do some personal financial planning that they could build some wealth outside the business. 95% or better, really probably close to 100% of the individual's wealth was tied to the business. So certainly risk with that as well. And we also hired a coach was hired as well, and Tom played an active role in that. In the end, we closed a transaction in the middle of COVID for more than double the value of the business. The individual's still there. The other neat thing about it is we were able to get shares transferred to key employees that were brought in as part of this coaching process. And we also were able to work with the CPA firm and a good M&A attorney, and we did some tax strategies that benefited the business owner as well. So it really was it was an enjoyable process. Due diligence, I don't know if anybody's been through due diligence, but it's really opening your kimono. Wayne, you've probably been through that with your family's business. By working effectively in the planning process over the 3 or 4 years, we were able to make that go a little bit smoother, and especially during COVID, it made it go so much smoother. Our buyer actually was a private equity firm that was not able to make it up during COVID. And because we developed such a process in place, it really became an effective tool in that process. So, I'm a big believer in doing that planning, is really taking the time, talk about the risk or the value. Is there things we could do to make it better? We also helped them build a recurring revenue model. That recurring revenue model also helped create some barriers to entry for them too. And it's not something that you do overnight. I mean, we get cases where we got one right now, we're in the middle of evaluation in June, July, and he passed away on us. We actually got 2 of them going right now. And those are unfortunate, and you got to deal with them and get on them quickly. But I guarantee those values are less than if we would have planned in advance or dealt with it earlier than that. So I hope that example helped you there, Wayne, and maybe gave you some food for questions and thoughts.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of places we can go. Thanks. So one thing you said was about due diligence, and I've been through it. Yes, for sure. And the second time was easier than the first because we went through due diligence when Dad brought on a private equity investor, and then we went through it again after the company was sold the second time. But there had been preparation all along because the private equity firm comes in knowing full well that they don't plan to be there forever. So if you have a good management team, they start taking you through a process that is ultimately designed to already prepare you for when they're going to exit down the road. It's noteworthy that, I love it that you do this. Again, this is indicative of your servant type of a model. You do these valuations and consult in this way before anything even is going to happen with the transaction, which is good for the company you're doing the work for. And then of course it's going to benefit you down the road because you're the expert who they're going to come to, who they can trust now, and they know who you are because they've walked through that with you. My dad, it's his story, not mine, but when the private equity firm came in, he answered a letter in the mail. So it was, a letter came in the mail, and he later on said he wished he had somebody as an advisor when he was going through the process, because he had, of course, never sold a business before. That was the first time that he had ever done that. And it's like any other transaction we do that we don't do day in and day out. It's nice to have an expert in our corner who can help walk us through it. Yeah. So that way that can you just explain a little bit about how that works, where you do these valuations? Who do you do it for? What's the process? How do I get involved with that?
Yeah, so we do it for the client, of course, the business owner. Now, often we're referred in by a wealth management firm or by a CPA, an attorney, or even a bank. And now these are valuations not used for SBA loans or for gift or state tax returns, because there's certain requirements we have to apply then. And we're brought in. We try to get to know the business. We examine the financial statements, of course. We do the typical valuation type analysis, and how you would get involved, Wayne, would be, one of your clients comes to you and says, I'm thinking about a transition in 3 to 5 years or whenever the case is, and I really don't know where to begin, or I really want to know what the business is worth now. Give me a feel for that, and you would refer that client to us. We find, and it's an industry-wide thing across the whole country, not unique to Pennsylvania, And there's a lot of industry data. As you probably remember, Wayne, there's a valuation gap often with what business owners expect and what reality is. And our job, and your job, Wayne, too, is to bridge that gap. How do we get there? And sometimes that valuation expectation is more what they need to live on versus what the business is really worth. And we see it the other way too. You know, we have recently have a client that we're working with that's built a nice retained earnings account. Let's just say it's $2 million, but their EBITDA is more like 3. Well, they think the business is worth the retained earnings account, and it's really worth more of a multiple of what that EBITDA is. And working through them and trying to help understand, no, that's not the value. That's equity you built into the company. That's really not the value of the business. So, and then the other piece of that, Wayne, is, and I think it's part of our niche, is 2 pieces of that is, what are the tax implications of the sale? Especially with an older company, we see still a lot of C Corps out there. And how do you bridge that double taxation issue? We're going to possibly have some tax changes going on next year as well, which may make it even worse. And then the second component of that is, how do you finance a deal? We actually help private equity, and we help business owners buy companies and help them on the financing end, including the buyers of our engagements. And with half the team coming out of banking, we think we have a real nice niche in getting deals done too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what's the typical size company that you work with, ballpark?
It really depends. I mean, we typically don't do many companies above 10 million in EBITDA. So it's typically, $750,000 in EBITDA to 10 million, but we will work with clients in the planning process that are much smaller. And for buy side, there's really no lower end on that end. So, there's a lot of good examples of clients we worked with that had no EBITDA when we first met them, and or were in trouble with their bank. And one of the things in your introduction, you mentioned about turnarounds or working with challenged business owners. We will spend some time with their banker and spend some time with them, put the bank on pause if the bank's putting pressure on them. They'll work with us, find them a new bank, and then work with them on building a plan to build that EBITDA back up. And again, often we're outlining the plan, but we're picking up the phone and calling Wayne and saying, Wayne, here's what we need to work on, and kind of working with people like you and Tom to help execute those plans. The biggest challenge is whether the business owner will listen.
Yeah.
At times.
So anybody who's listening, Tom Garrity is the founder of Compass Point Consultants, and they work primarily with family businesses to help them with strategy, and then to help them with plans for transition down the road, help them grow. It's always helpful. You said companies that have no EBITDA, right? Sometimes companies are turning over a lot of, there's a lot of revenue there, but there's not a whole lot left over at the end of the day. It's just a lot of busyness that doesn't generate bottom line profit, would be the other way.
Yeah, another example of that is we're on the edge of the natural gas world. 25 miles north of us is natural gas, the beginning of the natural gas world. Many of those businesses did amazingly well during the gas boom. $5, $6, $7, $10, $11 million EBITDAs, and then drop to zero. And maybe you're back up to $2 or $3 million EBITDA, but still have a 70, 80% customer concentration doing one thing, maybe delivering water to gas field sites. Well, that's not going to last forever. And so, working with them to diversify that cash flow stream, but also diversify the customer mix. They're often dependent upon one owner too. And that's, we're happy to work with them to plan those type things out. And I think with this mini gas recession we have right now, gas field recession, we're seeing them benefit from taking some action like that and having more of a diversified cash flow stream.
So interesting having somebody like you involved and talking about a business that way, because you're on the outside in some sense. I mean, you're working to help them, but you have it at arm's length, and so you can see it very soberly. And you said the example that you gave, what went through my mind right away is like, well, yeah, there's no EBITDA, but they probably have a lot of equipment and trucks and things like that. And then you think, well, you could liquidate it. You could just sell these trucks for what, but you can play through those scenarios of like, this is the reality. This is what you got. And it's not emotional for me, but it is an emotional thing to think about selling a business, right? It's emotional to think about a plan, and it can bring up thoughts of, like, most of us don't, Stoics say we should meditate upon our own death, but many of us are uncomfortable with that concept. And I think when you talk about selling a business, it's in some ways similar. Like, you know, the idea that I might sell it or exit from it could feel a little bit like death, because many of you listening have built something from a dream, and it's like your baby. And Chad, I'm going to loop you in here. Um, you know, I shared with both of you that I had a few responses to the invite to join this event of, I don't want to sell my business, which is totally fine, of course. But Chad, I found it interesting that as we were talking to get started, you said, hey, in the short term, Bob, you said beamed up. That was a good way of saying that. Chad used what the more standard one, which is, what if I get hit by a bus, as the owner. But it was interesting because Chad, you said you showed up because you're interested in like succession planning and short term, and it's a reality that's something like that could happen. You fly planes sometimes, right? And then all of us, none of us know the day or the time. And then also you said, hey, like, and really like longer term, I'm here because I have to think about cash out, what would happen down the road. I'm not going to be here and on it forever. So I'm just curious, you seem to have you love the business, love what you do, but you're also open-minded to talking about the future and what could happen and things like that. And you're on mute, by the way. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just like you hit, it's kind of two-pronged for me for sure. One is almost a sense of anxiousness that, just like if you didn't have life insurance, right? And you get to a certain age and you're like, well, you know, I ought to get some life insurance for my family's protection. Same thing here. I just feel like I'm going to use your beamed up thing, Bob. I think in the near term, you have to mitigate risk to whoever's left behind if something tragic does happen, whatever that might be, right? In the short run. So how do we make sure we have a very effective succession plan in an event like that in the short run? In the longer run, for me, I'm always focused on the destination, right? And so what's the long-term destination of the journey that we're on? And if we don't start with the destination in mind, then it's impossible to get there. We just end up doing circles, or at the very best, just killing time. So that's the reason I wanted to dial in today, was both of those things. And then uniquely, or not necessarily uniquely, but certainly a big part of what we are is a family business. So, you know, what are the aspects of transferring that over to family members, not just some, you know, private equity thing that might exist later on. So those are the angles that we kind of look at it from.
And
Yeah.
since I didn't, sorry, Bob, but Chad, real quickly, so your business is, and where is it at? And
Sure.
employees?
So we're Eight Oaks Farm Distillery. We are a distillery that grows grain like wheat, rye, corn, and barley, and we turn it into rye whiskey and bourbon and vodka and gin and things like that. We have been in business for about 5 years now, and we're up in New Tripoli, Pennsylvania.
Super. I hadn't turned the camera on when you
Yeah,
talked
no
through some of
problem.
the things, so
No
I thought
problem.
I hit that. Hey, so what questions out of what Bob was saying, like what did that, I saw you writing notes, I could do that.
Yeah, lots of
What
notes.
would
I
help?
think Bob and I are going to have more conversation. Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously this is such a huge and broad topic, but right away, you know, one of the things I talked about was valuation for planning purposes. I hit on that, or took that away from something that you mentioned, Bob. I think, you know, super important is to be very realistic about where we are. Again, it's to me, it's that map. You know, let's look at the destination, but we also have to be very certain about where we are to get to the destination. So I think the valuation for planning purposes is something that, you know, it almost gives you a sense of, man, I'm behind. I need to get on this stuff right away, right? So that was certainly something that I took away. The other thing that I think a couple of different times you mentioned ESOPs or, employee stocks of some sort. That's something that I'm always interested in too, is how do you talked about share transfer and, what I love about this conversation and what it's just opening up my mind to a whole lot of different things. We're so focused on the operations of our business, right? And so to lift our head up to think strategically takes a lot of effort. And then to lift our head up even further to think about things at this strategy level is even more of a challenge for those that are operationally, involved. But, what are the company's specific risks? That's another piece that, I take away from this, because if we can identify those risks from someone that is dispassionate, and in my world back in the Army, we always red teamed things. I don't know, the concept of red teaming was always something that was very valuable. So you would have a third party come in, another organization, another unit to come in and probe your unit on whatever specific tactics it uses and see really how good you are, because it's very easy to convince yourself that you're doing well. So I would love that kind of red team concept from the perspective of what you are bringing to the table, Bob. So I think, that's what I'm most excited about is coming up with, a plan, long-term plan. Let's not make something that like, hey, we need this right now, because that's too operationally and tactically focused. Let's have that long-term 3 to 5 year plan that we can start over a cup of coffee very methodically. So I'm excited about a few things that you brought up.
Yeah, Chad, that was great. And I like the red team concept. In fact, I'm going to steal that for. Yeah. We formed a alliance with 9 other firms in the U.S. and the best practices group, and a firm in the UK and in India. And I'm a kind of a peer review that the CPAs go through.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of a neat concept. And there's a book out there called Finish Big, which is a good book. He talks about being always able to sell to private equity. But one of the things you talked about with an ESOP there is that's very similar in how you approach that, even though it's a little different animal. I sit on a 4th generation company board, Bingham and Son Lumber. We're here in little Kramer, Pennsylvania, which is, they're the biggest thing in town when people are working. But similar type of thoughts we've had many times. How do we keep this value system and brand and culture together? And it's a partial ESOP now. So currently there's not a 5th generation working in the business, but their future CEO, who's currently CFO, really feels like a family member and believes in the culture that was built many moons ago, and that's a challenge. But it didn't happen overnight. It took some planning to get there, and it's constant. We just had a Zoom board meeting recently, and how do we keep the culture going in the middle of COVID? And there's they're spending some money to keep the culture going during COVID, and maybe not quite following all the rules by the book to make sure it happens that way too.
Yeah.
Bob,
I definitely get that too. These times of uncertainty definitely bring in some opportunities as well.
Chad mentioned like this feeling of I'm behind and there's this checklist and I should go through this thing. What would be you think of, Bob, a checklist? What are some things that a business owner should be thinking about from a planning point of view that could be a mitigating risk of what would happen in the beam up event, for example?
Yeah, so I'll use my own firm as an example, and it's not we're preaching to the business owners to do certain things, and one of them is work on the business, not just in the business. And I really started trying the last few years to take Fridays and say I'm going to work on the business, so in the business. Well, COVID was, I saw COVID coming, and my partner was in Florida. And I thought, boy, I really need to spend Saturday and Sunday making sure if something happens to me, it's really documented well, where everything is. And you go 16 years, you forget you think everybody knows everything, that where things are and things along those lines. So we kind of made an emergency checklist. My partner didn't really want to look at it, over the fears of those type issues. But what crossed my mind as it relates especially to COVID was not just the death piece of it, but disability piece of it, and how that piece can be just as detrimental to the business as it is, a loss of an owner or a key person in the business. So, we have a good buy-sell agreement. I pulled it out. It was 16 years ago we wrote it. And, a good buy-sell agreement is critical, how the business is valued. We touched on things like life insurance, but, disability insurance often is missed. Just thinking through, back to, we got a client that is buying out his brother. If they're 250-50 owners, 250-50 owners are without a great buy-sell agreement is almost a disaster. We got another client that's been trying to deal with a new buy-sell agreement since 1986 that can't get signed, and they haven't talked in probably 10 years. The two partners do amazingly well for not talking to each other. But critical of having a good buy-sell agreement. Critical talking to your family. If you really want your family to eventually take over the business, to start those conversations. This one that's buying out his brother, his two daughters are really interested in being in the business. So they're in college right now. He's encouraged them to go work somewhere else over the summer. One's actually going to come work for us as an intern next summer to understand the business part of it and the valuation piece of the business, and be outside the business a little bit. Having those structures in place related to things like the buy-sell agreement, talking about what it means to run a business. We all know when you run your own business, it doesn't end at 5 o'clock. You're often dealing with things post the close of the business hours. It's still on your mind. But also trying to build a quality of life at the same time. That one with the double the value of the business, or a little bit more than double. One of the objectives there that we built in was, can you go away for 3 weeks and not check into the business, and it's going to run by itself? So he went somewhere where the cell phone didn't work and he had no Wi-Fi 2 summers ago, and literally the business ran better without him. And he came back and knew he had the right leadership team in place, and we had still some holes to fill in over the next year, but it takes some time. Sometimes we find business owners are challenged in understanding bringing a key person in may add value. You may have to pay them $150,000 a year to do it, and it may seem like you're taking profits out of your wallet in the short term. In the long term, they often add a lot of value. And there are better business owners that figured that out in the long run. I don't know if it's almost company specific, that checklist. It's almost really an industry specific, and really understanding the business and the industry. Gas field guys are different than the lumber guy than it is the quarry guy or the machine shop type of guy. They're all other little unique things in our industry, and understanding that value to some degree, and where the industry is going too. If there's a roll-up process going on in the industry right now, maybe that's the time to start thinking about it. But if it's what's it going to look like 5 years in the industry? And then currently this election's causing some people to think. COVID and the election are probably the two biggest things I'm getting hit with this year.
Yeah, got it. Chad, do you have any specific questions that you want to hit? I can keep asking questions, but if there's something specific you really want to know, I want to make sure you get your question answered.
I think my question was more along the lines of things that we've already discussed is, what is the value of doing this right now? What can we do now? Is this too early? It's one of the conversations that I've been just having with myself. Is it time to bring in somebody like Bob, or is this too early in the game? I think we've already answered that question today. So, I have been looking at buy-sell agreements and some of those things that we currently do not have fully in place. We have a founder's agreement, but it really doesn't address some of the things that have shaken out over even the last 5 years. You mentioned that yours was 16 years old. Even in the last 5 years, things have changed dramatically. So, I think there's a lot of personal ground that we could cover, but I really think that's for, Wayne, you and me and Bob to come up with a way of, how do we do this? It's more specific to our company.
It's an interesting thing with planning for the exit at some point, whether you want one or not, you're going to have one.
Yep.
We had an angel group over here. It's still here, but it's mostly inactive right now. But any angel investment we did, that was one of the key questions we asked the business owner. We didn't want them to necessarily sell the business. We just wanted to know how we're going to get out and also how they're going to get out. And planning on that piece, and then that buy-sell agreement should deal with that issue too. But the one thing we always advise them, plan on being successful. And often those buy-sell agreements miss that point. So, if you're 5 million in sales today and tomorrow you're 50 million in sales, that buy-sell agreement may overly reward us angel investors wrongfully. And we were trying not to take advantage of people we invested with. We wanted a good return. We were taking a lot of risk. But it was an interesting dialogue that light bulbs would go off with some business owners when they were coming in. They were so focused on getting that first round of funding to get their business started, they missed what would happen if they were successful.
Yeah, I fully appreciate that. I guarantee you that we have done exactly that. And, we do have some investors in our business that, each one is unique, as you know, and each one has their own exit strategy, as it might be. I like that you said an exit's going to happen whether or not you want it to at some point. As a pilot, we always talk about you always have a last landing. Hopefully, it's coming. But there's always a last landing that you're going to have, whether or not it's coming. So yeah, this is just brought to life and really just confirmed everything that I had talked about, and then brought up a whole lot of other things that I had not thought about yet that I think just make me more ready to get the process started.
Hey, so a question that I think would help people. There's two of them come to mind, Bob, maybe to help finish this out and go towards the end. One is, what are the ways that you see people exit businesses that you help with? So ESOP came up, private equity has come up, employee buyout, whether they're family or otherwise, has come up. These are some ways that you would know about your last landing. That's good, Chad. You're full of things I can see in my head. So what are the ways, Aidan? And then the other thing we'll dig into before we wrap up would be, how does the business owner start to get some kind of idea of what it's worth realistically, as opposed to, like you say, what they wish it would be, so that they would have their lifestyle needs met after they exit?
When you touched on the kind of the big ones, one big one you missed was, of course, if they are forced out of business, whether a liquidation or things along those lines, or just a orderly liquidation type approach. But we start the conversation typically around, have you explored all your family members? And we really think that's a critical piece. And sometimes you don't know that a child, for instance, has interest in being in the business. And you want to think those type of things through. Management buyouts, ESOPs, hybrids of those type of things, we often make sure we're covering. When we do our valuation work, we're addressing those things as well. Evaluations are different for ESOPs or management buyouts. They're often financing dependent to some degree. There are some ERISA and Department of Labor guidelines for ESOP valuations you have to kind of keep an eye on. Private equity, if it's an add-on, they pay a strategic price. They're paying up right now. There's $2 trillion in liquid private equity money out there. And finding the right private equity firm, sometimes there are family office type private equity firms that one with a double value. We only went to 3 private equity firms. We got 3 offers. They all had long-term investment horizons. And we're so glad what we did. We picked the second highest offer, actually, because we felt that was a better match. And then COVID happened, and it was perfect. It could not have been a better relationship between those 2 firms. You asked about kind of beginning the process. Typically, I would find someone like us and sit down with them. I would make sure you have a team. It's not just us, but your personal wealth management or trust officer or RA or somebody like that is critical that has some knowledge in this. And someone like you, Wayne, and having a good attorney and CPA all play a role. It's, you know, you hear you need a village to raise a child. It's similar in an exit piece. It's not one person doing it, and it's not a do-it-yourself type project typically. And just take the deliberate time to do that. You know, in Chad's case, I'd certainly want to sample the product as part of the due diligence. You know, I hate to admit I got to tour Jameson a few times in Ireland, so I'm not sure I'm an expert, but I appreciate it. But you know, really taking the time and asking the uncomfortable questions sometimes too is a critical part of what everybody should be doing in that process.
So so it's got it on how you start the process. Find somebody like you, have a conversation. Why not? And I always thought when I was working with my dad, having consultants come in, even if we didn't hire them, but just to have a deep conversation. I never left one of those conversations where I hadn't learned something or where it hadn't pointed out a gap, or like, oh, I never even thought to ask that question, right? So it's always worth doing that. I have what comes to mind is I've got a number of like home service businesses. Like let's say a landscaper has a handful of people. They, you know, trucks, equipment, all this kind of thing, pretty known type of a business. I don't know. Let's say they're generating $3 million a year, pretty nice size landscaping business. And they're like, wow, I wonder what my business is worth. That's one scenario. Another one that comes to mind is a professional services firm, engineering firm, and they're doing about $1 million, but you know they don't have material costs very much, not much cost of goods sold when it comes to like fertilizer or anything like that. It's all intellectual. So you get $1 million firm, and they've got some financials. They do financials. They have an accountant. Like, and they're like, well, I hope it's worth this. Like, where do they even start? I'm certainly calling you or somebody like you is the best move, but some of them also, you get to reading on the internet. Well, I read this thing about a multiplier of 4.0 or 6.0 or 8.0 or on EBITDA, but I don't calculate EBITDA. We just have our normal. Where does somebody start to have an idea of what's realistic?
Yeah, so I think that's not a bad start in understanding what the industry is. I hate those are rule of thumb type things, and as a certified valuation person, you know, we're kind of trained to hate those rule of thumbs, and we call them kind of dummy tests to make sure we're within a range of reality. And the problem with that is everybody's thumb's a different size, so you know, and they're averages too. So but they're not a bad place to start. So if you're a member of a trade association, some trade associations publish data related to what firm valuations are. I mean, it's, as an ex-bank CEO, I could price my bank in 10 seconds. One, it was publicly traded, but two, even in the sale, there was so much public data out there on what a community bank would sell for that's in the $1 to $10 billion in asset range, for example. So that kind of rule of thumb is not a bad start, but then it gets down to specifics of the company, and that's where we get to how do we increase that value. One of the things we often do with clients after we get through that first piece and working with someone like you, Wayne, is let's create a scorecard for the business owner to look at, whether it's once a quarter or once a month. And that might include things like EBITDA, or it might include value per employee. If you're an engineering firm, EBITDA is important for valuing a engineering firm, but it's also important for other parameters. How much is each engineer in your firm producing from a revenue perspective? Or if you're a CPA firm, how many hours is your partners putting in, or a law firm, and things along those lines. You know, you mentioned landscapers. You know, critical for landscapers to increase their value right now is recurring revenue. You know, if you're one-off a lot of projects, you're worth one. But if you're doing a lot of commercial type work, and then you have recurring revenue with that, with you know, real estate developers and office buildings are in a tough place right now too, with COVID and hotels, et cetera. But historically, if you build more recurring revenue, those landscape I'm shocked private equity is actually buying landscapers. As a lender, we were looking at more like one-off type projects, but reality is many of them have recurring revenue now. So if you're building a scorecard, I would build something. How much percentage of your revenue is recurring, and have service contracts, or if you're an HVAC contractor, electrical contractor, how much service work you're doing, and tie that also to the EBITDA, and you're going to find you have a bigger multiple for EBITDA with recurring revenue than just straight EBITDA. And that's where the rule of thumb's getting in trouble. Is you just look at EBITDA, it's different for everybody.
Got it. Well, that's a good point. So often I come in contact with businesses where the owner is the primary rainmaker, and they have all the relationships. And if they were to leave, then you better have a transition plan for who's going to sell. But when they're on a service contract and they are the ongoing residual type of income, it makes it a little bit easier to know what your cash flow is going to be like to be able to.
Yeah, so that example that when I shared with you, they were a manufacturer actually, but they also did service work. Well, we were able to build a model. The owner did, but we kind of helped with the process and identifying it. A model for recurring revenues that was, I'll use the example copy paper. It really wasn't copy paper, but if you think about the old copy paper model, is you bought the copier, and then you often bought the copy paper from that printer. You often bought the ink or the replacement ink from that printer, and then some of them built some models in such a way that you can only buy from them. So building some of those type models in there, and the recurring revenue that came from that, along with the service work and the barrier to entry to that, really helped in the valuation side for that business.
You said you're a certified valuation. What was it?
So it's called a certified valuation analyst. They're the CVA.
Analyst, so CVA. So that's one of the things that people might look for, to have a conversation with a certified valuation analyst, right?
Yeah, and the certified organization is called NACVA, NACVA, and there's a website that you can search by geography for those. And I'm on the PICPA evaluation committee. You can look on the PICPA side too. They list their valuation. People that do valuations in the CPA world too.
Great. So yeah, I'll link those in the notes when we build a web page for this interview. So that's helpful. Bob, thanks, and Chad.
Thank you.
To have you here to help guide the conversation. Anything as we end, Chad, that you really wanted to know, or?
No, it's a pleasure. I appreciate just being part of it. Thanks, Wayne, for including me.
And Wayne, thank you. Yes, and Chad, great to meet you. And I hopefully COVID at some point I'll get over to your place and do a road trip.
Likewise, we have hand sanitizer and we have stomach sanitizer. So whenever you're ready.
That sounds good.
Bob, what's your website?
www.murphymccormack, all one word, .com.
Great. And Chad?
Website is 8 Oaks Farm Distillery, or excuse me, 8oaksdistillery.com.
With the number 8.
Nope, it's just spelled out, EIGHT. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah, great. Super. People go have distilled spirits and contact Bob. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great day, guys.
Okay. Can we hang on for a minute?